Good evening and welcome to Aloud. Welcome to an evening dedicated to Wonder Woman. And we have some fans in the audience. And to Jill Lepore's marvelous book. Welcome if you are here for the first time. Particularly want to tell you about a little bit about Aloud, which is presented by the Library Foundation of Los Angeles. And those of you who are already members supporting the Los Angeles Public Library, our thanks to you. If you'd like to find out more about how the Library Foundation supports work of the Los Angeles Public Library all over the city, from resources for veterans, we're honoring veterans this month, to adult literacy programs, to children's programs. There's a great way to support the library, and you can support Aloud too. And if you do become a member tonight for the first time, we do have a couple of Jill's books that we could gift you with if you want to choose a book from our Aloud bookshelf. So our format tonight is a conversation between Jill Lepore and Alex Cohen. And after their conversation, they will open to you for questions. We'll raise your hand and we'll bring the mic around. We'll have time for some questions, and we ask that you really do ask a question and that you just ask one per customer. We would appreciate it. And afterwards, Jill will be signing her books in the lobby courtesy of our library store. And when you do buy your book on site tonight, that also helps support the library. So thank you in advance. In 1972, Gloria Steinem and the co-founders of Ms. Magazine picked Wonder Woman to be the cover girl on their first issue, and I think we'll see a slide of that later. And Gloria Steinem recalled the thrill she felt as a child when she first encountered that buff Amazonian princess flying by invisible airplane from her sheltered island to help America in World War II. In her new book, The Secret History of Wonder Woman, Jill Lepore argues that all along, the superheroine has been a kind of missing link in American feminism. And as she explores that nexus of feminism and popular culture, she unpacks a revelatory chapter of American history. Her new book tells the feminist backstory about Wonder Woman's eccentric and inventive creator, William Moulton Marston, and the secret life he shared with his wife, Sadie Elizabeth Holloway Marston, and a younger woman, Olive Byrne, and how their abandonment of conventional identities helped lead to Wonder Woman's creation. We'll hear about that and much more in Jill Lepore's book, which not only overflows with ideas, it is, as graphic novelist Alison Bechdel called it, quote, as racy, as improbable, as awesomely righteous, and as filled with curious devices as an episode of the comic book itself. Jill Lepore is one of America's most esteemed essayists. She's an award-winning historian, Harvard professor, and New Yorker staff writer. Her work frequently explores unmined chapters of American history, or what she calls absences and asymmetries of evidence in the historical record. Among her many books, one that I'm loving reading right now, Book of Ages, The Life and Opinions of Jane Franklin, the youngest sister of one of our founding fathers, a smart, witty, and hardworking woman whom I'm sure you've never heard of. I hadn't either. And it contains one of my favorite sentences about a brother and sister ever. He loved no one longer. She loved no one better. Jill is just such a wonderful writer. Among other books, just to mention a few, as Jill is a veritable Wonder Woman herself, The Story of America, Essays on Origins, The Mansion of Happiness, A History of Life and Death, and The Whites of Their Eyes, The Tea Party's Revolution, and the Battle over American History. And we knew that Alex Cohen was going to be the perfect interviewer for tonight after she sent us a photo of her daughter in her Wonder Woman outfit. And another great quality of Alex is that she is the author of Down and Derby, The Insider's Guide to Roller Derby, as well as being the fabulous co-host of KPCC's Take Two show. And you've probably heard her as well before on All Things Considered. We welcome back Alex Cohen, and please join me in welcoming Alex and Jill Lepore. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming out tonight. I have to say I've done a number of these chats at Aloud, and I was never as excited as when I heard, would you like to talk with Jill Lepore about Wonder Woman? Yeah. And we're going to do that in just a moment. But my first question, Jill, please forgive, is not for you. It's for our audience. I would like to know how many of you out there grew up in some way, shape, or form, be it the comic books, the TV show, the animated TV shows, grew up with Wonder Woman and thought she was awesome. Well, of course. Thank you. Now, here's something interesting I found out today. Jill Lepore, kind of meh on Wonder Woman as a kid growing up. I was convinced it was going to be one of those, I had the Linda Carter
No, I have
picture on
no
my
Wonder
wall.
Woman cred.
Yeah, none at all. What was your thought on her growing up as you saw, the Linda Carter version?
I had a crush on Patrick Duffy in The Man from Atlantis. Do you remember that? He was almost always nearly naked. He had the little yellow Speedo trunks on. So that's why.
Yeah.
I was distracted by the boy.
Well, and eventually you wound up distracted by another boy, another man, which is how you kind of wound up falling into this wonderful book, The Secret History of Wonder Woman, a guy named William Moulton Marston. And we just heard a little bit about him, but man, I mean, this guy is almost an amazing of a character as Wonder Woman, except he's real. Tell us more, for those who haven't read the book yet. Tell us more about this guy.
Yeah, Marston is really endlessly fascinating. There's some kind of almost not an effort in American culture that he doesn't have a hand in the first half of the 20th century. He pretty much tries everything. And I love watching him over the course of his life move from one endeavor to the next. He once wrote this little essay about his life called The Experimental Life of William Moulton Marston, the kind of like Education of Henry Adams thing. His was really a life of experiments. So he tried everything and failed dazzlingly at each of these things. But he had this very bright start as a young man. He went to Harvard and right out of the gate was celebrated as a very great student, and he became devoted to the new field of experimental psychology, his brand new field at the time, and decided to stay on at Harvard, got a law degree, then got a PhD in psychology. He, by 1923, when he was a very young man, he was widely credited as the inventor of the lie detector, what we would call the polygraph. He then embarks on this academic career as a teacher of legal psychology, but then that falls apart for reasons having to do with his strange family life. He then comes to LA in 1928. He's hired as a consulting psychologist for Universal Studios. They're trying to help think about the transition from sound film, from silent films to sound films. Is in Hollywood for a few years, and then he ends up in comics. So he goes through science, the law, filmmaking, comic book writing, and in between, he's one of America's most celebrated pop psychologists.
He's a fascinating guy. What I liked especially when you write about the lie detector test was kind of how he really had to insert himself in everything. It wasn't just the lie detector test. It didn't work unless he was administering.
Yeah. So during the First World War, the National Research Council, which is formed in the First World War, has a psychology committee, and Marston convinces the chair of the committee to found a subcommittee on the detection of deception to investigate whether Marston's important research done at Harvard could be used to interrogate spies and prisoners of war. And the other scientists say, well, it doesn't really seem to work. And so Marston devises a series of tests to demonstrate that it works. And the committee keeps saying, well, you need other people to administer the tests. And if it works also with them, then it works. It only ever works when Marston is administering the tests. And he just attributes this to the lesser talents of these other psychologists.
He has some very interesting, especially given the era in which he grew up, some very interesting attitudes and ideas about women, which of course are at the basis of this character, Wonder Woman. Talk a bit about those.
Yeah, well, there's two sources for those ideas about women, and in fact, they come into conflict with one another, and that's why there's such a kind of hodgepodge of ideas about women in Wonder Woman, and they really are in conflict with one another. So one source is Marston's work as a psychologist, and if you think about, this is the era, he's training in the 19-teens, when Jung and Freud are still around and their ideas are gaining traction in the world of psychological thinking. And Marston has a set of ideas. He writes an important book called The Emotions of Normal People that is his philosophy. That is not meant ironically, I assure you. But it's his theory of emotions. And when you read it, you're like, this stuff is just crazy. Who would have believed that? But the reason it's important to kind of pull back from that is say, like, if Freud had gone nowhere, or if Jung had gone nowhere, and you just were to pull Freud's like case study of Dora or Jung on symbols and dreams or something off a shelf now, and you had never heard of it before, you'd be like, who would have believed this stuff ever? This is nuts. Marston's work has that same quality, but there's a kind of freewheeling world of psychiatry and psychology in the 19 teens and 20s that he's really caught up in. And he comes to believe that women and men share a neuronal experience of emotions in which all emotions come down to 4 kinds of emotions: dominance, submission, captivation, and inducement, which is where all the bondage in Wonder Woman comes from. You will have heard the word, your ears would have perked up and said, dominance. So he actually believes that dominance and submission and captivation are essential to our experience of one another emotionally, and in particular, the experiences between women and men. So there's this sort of psychological origins of his ideas about gender, but also especially about sex. And that leads him in his one big sort of masterwork, Emotions of Normal People. It's an argument against the idea that there is an abnormal psychology. His whole idea in Emotions of Normal People is like anything you feel is neuronal, it's therefore normal. It adheres in your neurons, and you should learn to love the love parts of yourself, he says.